So you're thinking about buying one of those sunrise alarm clocks. Or maybe you've seen these things called sad lamps being advertised and you're wondering about them. Well, before you click buy on any of these things, you probably want to watch this video first. Because with the winter months fast approaching, and in 2 weeks here in the UK, the clocks are going to be changing back to standard time. So the days are seemingly getting even shorter. And with that, for many of us, our energy levels take a real dip. And sometimes our moods too. There are now a bunch of lights and lamps on the market, all promising to be able to lift your mood and boost your energy levels. But are they really all they're made out to be? And if they are, how do you know which one to pick? These lights and lamps are not all created equal, which might seem like a really obvious point to make, but particularly as we come up to the Christmas holidays and you might be thinking of buying one of these things for yourself maybe, or for a loved one, it's worth remembering that there's no point going out and buying the first one you see on Amazon, or the biggest discounted one, or the one that just looks like a light up Pokemon because it looks cute. Because really, ultimately, you're buying it for a particular reason, and you want to know that the one that you're getting is right for you. The first really important distinction to make is that sad lamps are not the same as sunrise alarm clocks. So this is a sunrise alarm clock. Specifically, it's the Lumi Body Spark 100, I think. I think it's one of their base models of a sunrise alarm clock. And essentially what it does is tries to simulate a natural sunrise, which is quite cute, really. So this is from the Lumi website. It says, Lumi wake-up lights are like a personal sunrise, a gradually brightening light that gently rouses you from sleep so that you feel naturally wide awake, more energized and ready for the day ahead. Ooh, that sounds rather nice, doesn't it? Well, they go on to say, at bedtime, a fading sunset creates an environment where sleep comes easily, leaving you rested and refreshed when you next wake. Doesn't that sound lovely? And it sort of is, because you know what? I really like this thing. It was gifted to me. I didn't choose it, but I use it most days. And it makes you feel really nice. It has this sort of warming glow effect that sort of brightens the room gradually. The functionality is pretty basic, I've got to be honest, but you can basically set the time you want it to start waking you up, and it does so over about 15 minutes to half an hour. But really, they're just sort of a good all-round, all-purpose sunrise, sunset alarm clock, if you can call it an alarm clock, where they're just trying to emulate or simulate the natural daylight cycles and try and avoid too much variation, the natural variation that you might see, particularly if you live in a country that's quite far from the equator. Sad lamps, on the other hand, are actually quite different, or at least they're intended to be. They're meant to be a sort of therapy for a condition called Seasonal Affective Disorder, which is a medically recognized condition and sometimes medically diagnosed condition, which is typically characterized by poor sleep cycles, reduced energy levels, sometimes changes in appetite, and also in mood. And you might quickly realize that these symptoms actually have quite a significant crossover with symptoms of depression. And actually the two conditions are thought to be related. But crucially, with SAD or SAD or Seasonal Affective Disorder, whatever you want to call it, there is a change in mood and energy with the seasons. And typically that's going from the summer months into winter months. So SAD lamps are usually used as a morning therapy after you've woken up. Whereas with the sunrise alarm clocks, you use them sort of as an alarm itself to wake you up. Usually SAD lamps are indicated after you've got up, maybe whilst you're sitting, having breakfast or reading a book in the morning, to be as bright light therapy, sort of like the one I've got shining down on me at the moment. Okay guys, I thought I'd just show you a quick video on how these sad lamps actually work. Right, so let's turn it on. Oh, that's bright. So the idea is you'd be sat down maybe at your breakfast table on a cold winter morning when it's dark outside, and you have this sort of about an arm's length away from you. And I've got to say, it's very bright. They're small, but they pack a punch. And it's a little uncomfortably bright, but I reckon you could get used to this. The one thing they say is you don't look at it directly. You have to have it off at an angle slightly. And I think, ideally, you have this at a slightly raised angle as well. But you know what? It is bright. This distinction between sunrise alarm clocks and sad lamps is actually a bit more obvious when you go online and you look at the product pages and you go to the checkout page and you realize that for some of the sad lamps, there's a little box that you can click to say, I'm buying this for seasonal affective disorder. And in doing so, they'll often give you sort of a tax exemption or a VAT exemption here in the UK. The next thing to mention is that 10,000 lux seems to be the magic number. Okay, so this is where I probably should have brought in some sort of lighting engineer, but to keep it simple, lux is a measure of brightness, or more accurately, it's a measure of how well light illuminates an object. And so in this case, we're talking about how well the sad light illuminates and reaches the back of your eyes. 10,000 lux is also about the same amount of illumination that you get with a natural early morning sunrise. However, 10,000 lux from a sad lamp does not at all match the amount of light you'd be getting outside in the middle of the day. The next thing that I think is probably worth mentioning is that you should probably think of light as a prescription. But just as when doctors prescribe medications for things like high blood pressure or cholesterol levels, when it comes to light, as soon as you start using it artificially and in order to treat some sort of condition, you are actually hacking, I hate that word, hacking your body's natural chemical balances, and specifically you're changing the levels of neurotransmitters in the brain, things like serotonin and dopamine, which you may have heard of, and also hormones around the body like melatonin and cortisol and adrenaline, all of which have an important role in sleep and wake regulation, as well as a load of other things. It's probably worth mentioning at this point that although these lights are thought to be safe, we're quite early on in our discovery of how light affects health. We do know certain things, like we know that infrared light has certain effects on the body, we know that blue light has certain effects on the body, and UV light has certain effects on the body. Some of these effects can be good and some of these effects can be bad depending on the type of light. But really, there's so much more to be learnt about the field of light and its impact on our health. So it's just worth keeping that in mind as you go forward and look to buy one of these products. As we talked about earlier, not all light is the same. In fact, if you remember back to school science lessons, you might remember that light exists on what we call the electromagnetic spectrum, and visible light, the light that we see, is only a small part of this. Some of these bulbs might emit more light on the bluish end of the spectrum, and some might emit a bit more light on the reddish and amber end of the spectrum. What you really want, and what's being developed more and more these days with certain LED bulbs, is a type of light that is emitted which pretty much emulates as faithfully as possible the natural daylight spectrum that we have outdoors. Next, a practical one. So if you do go out and buy one of these lights or lamps, it's really important to think about where you're going to be putting it, what the space you have looks like, and whether there's an option for any wall mountings or any shelves nearby. Because depending on the light that you buy, the options for sizes and portability, as well as wall mountings or the ability to tilt, they can vary quite significantly. For sad lamps, the tilt is actually thought to be quite important actually, because it's thought that the optimal place for sad lamp therapy, or bright light therapy as it's sometimes called, is thought to be above you, about 30 centimeters away I think, at about a 30-degree angle facing downwards towards your eyes. And that's because the sensors, or the receptors for this type of bright light therapy, are usually found at the back and bottom parts of the eye. And when it comes to these sunrise alarm clocks, they do tend to be quite portable actually. I think that's presumably because the manufacturers know that people are going to plonk them on their bedside tables. But what I would say about them is that they actually do often come with options for lots of bells and whistles, ambient noises, or an FM radio built into it. And in my personal opinion, you're absolutely free to go off and buy whatever you want. I think the premium you pay for those options is just a bit excessive, and I'm quite a big fan of the basic functionality of these things. I do think the snooze alarm on a sunrise alarm clock is sort of probably not the most helpful thing, even though snooze alarms are pretty much like standard on any sort of alarm clock. Particularly if you're a sufferer of insomnia, snooze option is just not a really good option to have in any sort of alarm clock. Okay, so we're coming into land. The final point is that consistency matters. So whatever you buy, whether you buy a sunrise alarm clock or a sad lamp or something that's advertised as something else, the main thing is that you use it consistently, because the beneficial effect that you typically expect to see is usually only evident at about 3 or 4 days after using these lights quite consistently. So for the alarm clock lights, just leave them by your bedside table, pick a time, and try and stick with it for a few days. You can assess after 3 or 4 days how you're feeling in yourself, whether you need to make any tweaks, and then you do another 3 or 4 day experiment. And when it comes to the sad lamps, or bright light therapy as they're sometimes called, and sometimes I think people call them happy lights, I think the main thing about that is finding a way where you can use it consistently in a practical way. So think about which room in your house or apartment that you want to keep the sad lamp. Preferably you want to have it somewhere you go every day at the same time and do an activity that's about half an hour long. So maybe eating breakfast and reading the newspaper and just having it there in front of you. But there's always the exception to the rule, and unfortunately it's thought that up to about 30% of people who have seasonal affective disorder won't experience any sort of benefit from using bright light therapy or sad lamps. So whilst it's certainly worth a try if you've got the money to spend, it might not be the fix-all that you were hoping for. And in those sorts of cases, I'd recommend, particularly if you have seasonal affective disorder, speaking with your doctor about any other causes or any other treatments that might be helpful in considering your own health. And so to conclude, I actually quite like a lot of these lights and lamps that are on the market. I think obviously you have to think about the considerations of what you're going to be using it for, but they're generally relatively inexpensive, particularly when it comes to your own health, and certainly a lot of people experience a therapeutic benefit. So if you're looking for something that might help, it's worth a try. But your mornings might just be the tip of the iceberg, and if you're the sort of person who's watching this video, it might be that you're really tired through most of the day, or that you have really bad sleep problems at night. And so if you're interested, do subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to explore as much about sleep as possible, and in particular, practical strategies to help you get a better night's sleep and wake up feeling energized and refreshed. So if you found this video helpful, do leave me a comment, but otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!